Everyone, we're very happy you're here for this Economic Roundtable. There are so many pressures facing communities, and we're all aware of them. We are so looking forward to learning more about some of the things that are going on right now with the economy and how we can be educated and more informed in how we face the pressures that we are dealing with today. Just today happened to be doing some interviews, and we all know that the labor shortage is affecting all of us. So again, we're excited to learn and hope that we will be able to glean some positive information from the state. And with that, I would really just like to welcome Secretary Barca, who will be presenting to us today, as well as our other guests. And thank you all for coming. Very happy you're here.
Well, thank you so much, Mayor. And I came to know the Mayor a little bit more closely over the course of the last year because Mayor Crawford, who I served in the legislature, who's a friend of mine, we had worked on a community pandemic relief program with a number of communities around the state, including Neenah. And back when the Mayor was a city council member, she participated in that process, and I could see that leadership right from the start. She was someone that spoke up often and had a lot of positive things to say. And in talking to another city council member, Carrie Lindrum here, she said that things have been going very smoothly in the city. So congratulations on your leadership, and thank you again for hosting us. Also, before I introduce our team, I wanted to welcome a few different people. First of all, Becky Bartuzik, I hope I pronounced that right, Becky, is the president CEO of the Fox City Chamber. And we've done some programs with you before, and we appreciate your leadership and the fact that the Chamber is so active and always looking at economic data and trying to make sure that their members are informed. And then, of course, Barb Lemieux, who I've known for many years because before she became the head of the New North, she served on the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation Board, or she served as one of the key vice presidents. I was on the board since its inception, and so we work very closely together in that capacity. And then we also have the governor's representative from this region of the state, Tammy DeVolt Blaney, who lives, in fact, right here in Neenah, and is been somebody that if any issues come up that involve the Fox Valley or that arena, she's there to kind of tackle them and go to bat and hook you up with the right person, the right cabinet secretary or right administration official who can help you to get things done. So thank you for being here as well, Tammy. We appreciate it. And then from our team, I have our Deputy Secretary, Maria Garrila-Pasic, and she's someone that helps to, almost like a chief operating officer for our organization. And then I have two of our top economists, the top economists in the state, in fact. John Koskinen, who had been involved in the state for more years than we can remember. He was at the budget office, and he was the head of our research and planning division. And Emily Camfield, who currently works in that division, is one of the key macroeconomists that looks at economic data. And when you go to our website, many of the information data points that you'll find on there are things that she's put together. So I think you'll appreciate their presentation and the information that they have to share on our economic outlook. And for myself, I guess I'll open it up and just go through a few slides in terms of sort of at a 10,000 foot level, what I see from my desk as a cabinet member and someone that's responsible for sort of tracking the economy. And I also, as I indicated, I'm on the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation Board, so we work very closely with them. So in terms of the slides, I think, does this advance them? Let me see. There we go. So anyway, I'd like to start just showing you kind of where the money comes from for the state and then where the money is invested so that people can at least be aware. In terms of our budget, it's a little over $20 billion. The biggest percentage of money by far comes from individual income taxes. It actually was above 50% until our corporate sector really started growing, and maybe our economists might talk about that, but it's 46% of the revenue. Almost half comes from the individual income tax. Sales taxes is the next highest, almost a third, 31.6%. Third is corporate taxes at 12.7%. Excise, which would be more like tobacco and alcohol sort of taxes, is 3.4%. And then the rest you can see up on the screen. So just to give you that idea. So then next, in terms of expenditure, where does the money go? People are often very surprised to find out that 2/3 of the money goes right back to all of us in our home communities and in terms of our schools, in terms of individuals that need help. The biggest amount by far, which would be of no surprise for those of you who are from Wisconsin, over 1/3 goes for school aids. And of course, Wisconsin has been a state that has always prided itself on quality education and having a world-class workforce. So that's where most of the money, at least 1/3 of the money goes. Next is medical assistance. That's for seniors who are in nursing homes or people with disabilities that need that kind of extra assistance in order for them to live an independent life. Then all others beyond the ones I'm going to detail is 14%. But the third highest actually is state property tax relief. As you know, we have property tax relief credits that go right on the bill, one of which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But that's 7%. And then I'm sad to say the biggest item of spending we have in the state is on corrections, nearly 7%. And many states have, I think, found the recipe, Texas, Oklahoma, states like that, to have more correctional reform, to try and have people who are not a danger not be in prison, to be in more community corrections. So that's something I know we've been trying to accomplish. Next is UW system. Of course, it's one of the jewels of the state. Former Tommy Thompson, who I had the pleasure of serving with, served as UW president, and I thought he always described it as best that really it was one of the things that really distinguishes Wisconsin in terms of the research that they do, in terms of the opportunities, in terms of having a world-class workforce, so vitally important. And then you can see so on down the line, share revenues, the tech college system, community aids, and you can see that's why all of those, other than 14.4%, it goes for state operations. So most of it isn't returned in one fashion or another. Now on to sort of the state of the state fiscally. And the thing I can say with great pride is I have only good news to share. I mean, while obviously on a federal level, there's been some bumps in the road. We know the supply chain's a problem. Inflation, albeit it's coming down somewhat, still is far too high. But at a state level, things are just going amazingly well. We have the biggest surplus that we've had in the last 50 years. We've had major tax relief that we've passed over the course the last couple budgets, as well as a couple individual bills that have passed as well. We've had the largest drop in tax rates in the entire nation. The lottery property tax credit that goes right on the bill is the highest in our 33-year history. Equalized values have jumped again, and we're in the best fiscal position, as I said, in a half century. So going on from there, the latest news is our last budget was the largest tax cut in state history in terms of nominal dollars, one of the largest ever in real dollars. $2 billion in individual income tax relief over the biennium. 2.4 million filers have received tax relief. A median family of four has seen their taxes go down by $800 when you combine it with the budget bill as well as Act 9 and 10. One was a taxpayer enhancement bill. I won't go into too much detail there, but so anyway, obviously 86% of all taxpayers will see at least a 15% income tax cut, which is good news, which I'll point out why that really is a plus as we go forward to other slides. Other tax relief, one of the key things which, I was fortunate to serve 2 different tenures in the legislature, and one of the things that over the course of the last 15 years that we were trying desperately to achieve was to get back to something that we didn't have since Tommy Thompson was governor, which is having 2/3 of funding for public education. Now, why is that important? It's important for educational outcomes. It's also important for property taxpayers who are on fixed income to try and take as much of the schools off the property taxes as you can. And we, of course, the governor being a former superintendent of schools was one of his highest priorities, and we finally achieved it. It was a good bipartisan victory, something we all feel very positive about. Obviously, the tech college system, pre-pandemic, the biggest issue by far was workforce, and increasingly, workforce is our biggest issue again. And John Koskin in particular will give you some great data on this, but suffice to say that it's primarily a demographic issue. There's too many baby boomers retiring and not enough Gen Xers and Gen Zs and filling those slots in the workforce. So we've got to come up with creative approaches there, and we'll talk about that, but training, of course, is a vital part. Child and dependent care credit, that's one you wouldn't think of a workforce issue, but it really is, because what our economists find is that as we provide more help to people to be able to afford child care, more people can enter the job market. And then finally, another issue you wouldn't think of as a workforce issue, one of the other achievements that we had tried for 30 years in the legislature to get done, which finally was accomplished, was to give all active duty military personnel an exemption from paying taxes. So very important. Oh, they want me to speak more into the mic, okay. Thank you for telling me. Now, why is it important to exempt all active duty income? First of all, obviously, for the men and women in uniform, you know, they deserve that kind of support. But also equally important, because what we've heard in hearings that we've held is many active duty military change their place of residence, because if they are assigned to Fort Bragg or, you know, Camp Lejeune, those states do not have income taxes. So what the veterans groups have said, as well as active military personnel, is if you allow them not to pay taxes on that military income, they're much more likely to relocate in Wisconsin after they serve their military duty. It was something that General Knapp, who's the head of the National Guard, pushed extremely hard on, convinced the governor to join him in that effort, and it was a terrific victory to finally have that income being exempted. It's something we're all very proud of, and we think it's going to pay dividends in terms of you know, having more people come back to Wisconsin. Withholding tax changes, you know, part of the goal is when you have income tax cuts, you want to adjust the withholding tables. Of course, all of you are probably pretty savvy to know you can have deducted whatever you want to have deduct. Emily will tell you, most of our economists get it down to a nickel, but most people, like me, I just take the standard deduction, and but this way people can keep more of their money in their pocket versus having to get wait till the end of the year to get a refund. So very important from that standpoint, and it's working clearly because the economy is doing well. Next, this goes back to my point about why is it important to sort of get our tax rates in line. Just, you know, in 20 years, we went from being ranked 4th in the country in terms of having the highest tax load for state and local property taxes. And now we're right in the middle of the pack at 23rd, and we think it's going to improve further. Now, we're never going to be 48th or 49th because our winters are hard on our roads. It costs more for infrastructure. Also because we believe in quality education. That costs money too, and we do want to continue an investment in having quality education, a world-class workforce. But being in the middle of the pack makes us more competitive, and being on the WDC board of directors, I know in terms of recruiting companies, that is just one thing they look at, but it is an important item, and to be in the middle of the pack really does make a difference. So we're very pleased that we're moving in the right direction, and we think we're going to drop a little bit further because very few states have had the kind of tax cuts that we've had over the course of the past 4 years. Next up, equalized value. We just put out a report on Monday, so hot off the press here. But obviously, Wisconsin's done exceedingly well in terms of equalized values going up. That's very important in terms of having our property be worth more. Residential property, as you can see, has been very robust, increase at 15%. New construction values increased. Now, part of that, big portion is because of inflation, but it also increased beyond that. So that's another good positive sign for us. Another item I like to cover is, and I like to say, at the Department of Revenue, you think of taxes, you might think about state and local finance, we work with local governments, you might think about our economists, but a lot of people don't think about our entertainment division, the lottery. And lottery people like to say we're not Wisconsin, because believe it or not, even though we're an average size state in terms of population and size, we're 4th highest in terms of the number of winnings, even though we're only 17th in terms of buying tickets. So, that old phrase, better to be lucky than smart. Well, in Wisconsin, we're both. We're lucky and we're smart. So anyway, because of having that success, so we've had the largest credit in our 35-year history for homeowners, $229 average. And so that's obviously a plus for property taxpayers as well. Moving on from then, our fiscal health, as I indicated, is the strongest it's been in a half century. Sometimes I like to just only half joke about this, and I say, how do I know that for sure? Well, because John Koskin's been around 50 years, and he told me that's the case. And it's true, though, too. I mean, it's amazing. When I came back to the legislature in '08 for my second tenure, we had deficits as far as the eye can see. In fact, legislators took leave days in order to help the fiscal position of the state, as all state employees had to do as well. Now we have surpluses as far as the eye can see, which is very important to put us in a strong position. One thing, I was very pleased to be part of the pitch team for our bond rating, along with the Secretary of the DOA and our budget office, and of course the governor. And we finally got back to AAA bond rating in terms of Kroll, and AA plus from Standard & Poor's. So what that means is that when we go to borrow money for roads or new university buildings, we're going to pay less in interest. So that's a very important point as well. Now, part of the success, we believe, is because of the strategy where we were #1 in the country for taking the CARES Act money from the federal government and the ARPA money and to reinvest it back in our businesses. We heard stories, and we were, for the first time ever, the Department of Revenue administered these grants for businesses in particular, for farms, for hotel and lodging, for restaurants, which put us in touch with a lot of business owners who said that really that was the difference between their coming out on the other side of the pandemic. And so we were #1 in the country in terms of returning those dollars for businesses that I mentioned, also for individual support, for rent support, and other kinds of critical needs for nonprofits. And it obviously was very successful and made a big difference for many of those. You rarely, the Department of Revenue, you usually don't get thank you notes, but I've got a lot of them during that period. So that was kind of fun for our staff to see. Next, it was $1 billion that we provided in direct support for small business, farmers, tourism, entertainment. So that's how much it amounted to. Obviously, as I said, we were #1 in the country, so we're proud of that. The Main Street bounce back, that's another very important success that we had that we're so proud of, because, the concern we had at the beginning of the pandemic, especially because of public health reasons, most communities were shut down and businesses were struggling. We were like, business is going to last on the other side of the pandemic. Well, we actually had, the number of businesses in the state grow, believe it or not, through giving $10,000 grants to vacant commercial spaces. Grants were made in all 72 counties, and it made a big difference. So that was terrific. After the budget, a few more things that we feel still needs to be done as we look ahead to the next budget bill. And this is something, when we get to the Q&A, if you've got thoughts on this, we'd love to hear about it. But obviously, economic development, to make sure we're continuing to assist not only small businesses and retraining, but also venture funds. I had the good privilege of serving on the venture task force that Mark Buer, former cabinet secretary at Revenue and Administration under the Tommy Thompson era, and we proposed a $100 million venture capital fund for young people who want to start a business. We want them to stay right here in Wisconsin. And Wisconsin, we always have a little bit more conservative lending practices, which is good overall, but for venture type purposes and for young entrepreneurs, not so good. So having a venture fund would make a big difference. Property tax, personal property tax repeal, we came so close to having that be accomplished. The governor has $200 million set in a fund. So the second we can come to a bipartisan agreement on that, that would be something to be able to accomplish that we'd all be proud of. And then third, Badger Care. We're one of only 12 states in the nation that do not take money for federal Medicaid. And so that means that all of you are paying 100% of the freight for people that are on Badger Care, and 80% of that could be paid from the federal government. We could have $630 million of additional funds from the federal government. So why we're not taking it is beyond my wildest comprehension. So that's something we're continuing to push for. Another very positive thing, and having the good fortune of serving the legislature and in Congress, there was always a discussion about how do we get more federal money coming back to Wisconsin. Well, I talked about Badger Care, but transportation's another one. And Tom Petri, who served in Congress. I had the pleasure of serving with him. He was on the Transportation Committee, did a terrific job at having more funds being brought back in transportation. But another way you get more funds is that if you don't have enough shovel-ready projects, so at you get to the end of the fiscal year, whoever already has completed all of theirs, they reallocate. And in Wisconsin, we had $105 million in more funds that came back to us from the feds, thanks to your transportation departments here in counties and our state DOT, which has worked together very smoothly to bring back that extra money. In fact, if you fixed highways end to end, it would go from Platteville all the way to Denver. So we fixed a lot of roads, which has been a real plus. Next up, protecting against fraud. We just like to bring this up because, we've got a terrific IT department, and they get notices from Homeland Security all the time. And I'll tell you what, we have never seen more efforts to try to steal your income tax refunds, to steal your identity, to hack into our system. We spend millions of dollars every year to protect your identity. And I would just like to say, whenever we have business people around, and individuals for that matter, make sure your firewalls are up to date, that you have malware that protect you from malware and antivirus protection, because we've never seen so many attempts before, and they're only increasing, especially with the war going on in the Ukraine. There's more efforts than ever before. So make sure you're encrypting data like we do. Make sure you have strong passwords. Never send information, tax information, through Wisconsin, through a Wi-Fi connection that's not encrypted. So all of those things are very, very important, so we like to make sure you're aware of them. Finally, just towards the end here, I want to make you aware that one of the things we did at the Department of Revenue at the urging of the governor was to create a Badger task force, business development and government relations. So if any of you ever have issues that are concerning you, and we have some business cards for Badger, we'll put them out on the back table when we're finished, but you can call that network. They'll put you in touch with the right department, the right division, whether it's WDC, whether it's Department of Workforce Development. But our aim is to try to make sure that we have, outstanding customer service. The economists who are here today are part of that Badger network. I mean, that's part of their policy, research and policy division, but also all the slides you're going to see from them, all of that critical information you can find on our website. If you just Google DOR and VIZ, you'll be able to find all of this data that I think is very valuable, that I know you'll find useful in terms of making finance decisions for your businesses. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I think I'll let our economists go, and then at the end we'll all answer questions. But if you walk away from here and you think, oh, darn, I should have asked another question, feel free to email me at dorsecretary@wisconsin.gov, and I promise you we'll get back to you promptly. So thank you all for the opportunity, and next I'm going to turn it over to John Koskinen, who's our senior economist, who I introduced earlier about his background. And thank you, John, for being with us, and carry it away.
Thank you. And now let's see if I can find mine. From the beginning, always a good place to start. There we go. Okay, I have to twist this over. So unlike Peter, I didn't bring the crib notes, so I have to actually have to see what I'm about to say. So, all right. Very quickly, I want to recap the COVID contraction, a trip down memory lane, the nightmare. The COVID contraction was the worst economic contraction in U.S. economic history. In one quarter, the second quarter of 2022, the U.S. economy shrank by 36%. You can go back to the Great Depression, and you never had one quarter that was that bad. In the Great Depression's case, you had 10 of them back to back, which made it bad. In this case, that was the single worst quarter. You don't sit back and let things unwind like that. In order to prevent the economy from going down the drain in a very rapid spiral, there was considerable efforts to bring the economy back, whether it was the Federal Reserve stimulus or the U.S. government stimulus. You can see the difference between if we had done nothing versus what we actually did. The red line would trace what would have happened to Wisconsin personal income without the stimulus funds. The blue line traced what actually did happen. We're at the stage now where those funds are phasing out, but you can see we actually had good prop-ups of personal income until the economy got its legs. In particular, what we did on the stimulus funds to keep small businesses and farmers active, you can see the considerable difference between having the fall off that you had in proprietors' income, particularly farm proprietors' income, but we were able to prop up the business side going forward. I want to put that as a sort of a benchmark or a flag to think, because what Peter pointed out in the entrepreneurship and the stimulus funds and the support we provided to entrepreneurs, you'll see that when I get to the stage in Wisconsin entrepreneurship, how that has paid off. All of that work meant that you had not only the worst contraction in U.S. economic history, fortunately you had the shortest. It only lasted 2 months. And for the 36% decline was responded by a 30% increase going forward. If we look at our situation now for Wisconsin for housing and construction, it took a bit of a hiccup, but actually Wisconsin housing construction has bounced back. While because of rising interest rates, it's not quite the level it was, we are still running now, still seeing gains year over year. Even though the pace has slowed back from the beginning of the year, we're still up compared to we were a year ago and fully 7 million units ahead of pre-pandemic levels, 7,000 units. As Peter highlighted, in terms of the price indices, you are seeing the most rapid increases in Wisconsin housing prices you have seen in over 40 years. You see 2 lines there, one of which is the residential value line reported by the state and local finance department for the Department of Revenue, the other of which is the federal Freddie Mac home price index. They generally map 1-to-1. I was perfectly relieved because I've been putting out that slide for the Freddie Mac index without seeing what the official number was for the Department of Revenue, and I was completely relieved to see they were within 0.2% of each other, which sets up nicely because if you look at the Fox Valley home price levels, we are not seeing much of a fall off yet. You see a slight retreat, but year-over-year gains are still in the solid double-digit ranges. Commercial values not only did not falter during the COVID contraction during 2021, they just took off. If we compare where we've been on non-residential construction compared to the state of Wisconsin, during the pandemic year, we actually outpaced the U.S. Since 2010, we are basically matching at this stage what's going on in the nation. But compare ourselves to the state of Illinois, for example, there is a considerable difference. They have really not seen increases in new construction for commercial property, at least the pace of new construction since 2010, we're up substantially. Now, of course, labor markets. One of the hallmarks is, of course, we are still continuing to gain employment coming out of the the COVID contraction. We've recovered 342,000 jobs. On the private sector side, that's almost 90% of what the job losses were from the employer's standpoint have been recovered. But there's better news on the household side. The household side counts those that basically are including they are gig employees, they're self-employed, they're on the farm, or they're working remotely. Just not for a Wisconsin firm. They're in Wisconsin working, but they're working for a place in Massachusetts. That level has actually shown that we are already 45,000 ahead of pre-recession levels, and importantly, on the right side, you'll see the unemployment rate's been at 2.9. We've been below 3% since the beginning of the year, and we actually hit record lows of 2.8 right around April and May. Significantly, if we consider how many people are actually receiving unemployment, we are down to only 20,000 people, and this was data that was released today, that were actually receiving unemployment in the state of Wisconsin. Compared to the prior low for this point in July, that's down more than 5,000, and that was pre-pandemic levels. So in terms of the people that are actually out of work, it's few and falling. Wisconsin's among the 14 states that have an unemployment rate below 3%. Those are the good ones in green. We actually have a situation where our labor force participation rate is above pre-pandemic levels. That's the red line. And our labor force is continuing to expand. We are among a handful of states that can say that. This is actually using sort of the 2-year change from the start of the pandemic in February 2020 to February 2022, 2 years on. Are we ahead or behind where we left off? We're actually running ahead. And if you look at it on a metropolitan basis, you can see we are also, every one of our metropolitan areas can say the same thing. If there is a strength in the Wisconsin economy, people ask me where is our advantage, I would say it's the people that are living and working here. We are more likely to be engaged in the labor force regardless of age or ethnicity or gender, certainly by age group. In particular, one of the structural advantages we have is actually our teenagers are inclined to work, maybe twice as much as the rest of the country. But it's true for every age group. Among the prime working age population, which is that part that's 25 to 54, we have the 6th highest labor force participation rate in the country. And if we go back to that establishment, the household survey, and we were to compare where we were February 2022 to February 20, 2 years on, how many did we actually gain in employment? This is every county in the United States, and you can see that lovely green island right in the middle of the north part of the country. That is the state of Wisconsin. Overall, labor market is still tight, although we're starting to see some weakness. Still, we have almost 11 million job openings compared to pre-pandemic levels of 7 million. So we're still in a considerably short labor force. Over 10,000 job openings nationwide, really record openings in hospitality and retail, but also in that context, manufacturing. For us in the state of Wisconsin, we've been having over 200,000 job openings now for 13 consecutive months. And at this point, we have 126,000 more job openings than we have unemployed persons. So if you can imagine, if you had every unemployed person with the right skill, in the right industry, and in the right location, you're still short 126,000 people. Now, on Wisconsin entrepreneurship. Peter indicated the support that was provided to Wisconsin entrepreneurship, and it's paid off. In terms of the number of new startups and new business formations, Wisconsin entrepreneurship surged coming out of the Great Contraction. And best of all, of course, not only are that's people that are sort of putting up their shingle and it's one guy in a truck or some guy doing his own consulting gig, the persons that actually are having payroll also surged. As witness, we can see that surge in the number of businesses in the far right in particular. The change in private establishments in 2021 was the highest we have seen basically in the last 20 years. You can see that same result in this metropolitan area. You had that nice surge in 2021 in the pop-up. After declining since 2014, you've been building rather consistently in the number of businesses added in the community. Since 2010, Wisconsin has matched the growth in the number of businesses added. In that context, if you remember that old song, well, Wisconsin ranks last in startups. Well, in terms of actual, that may have been then, it's no longer true. Since 2010, we're matching the United States in terms of what really matters, and that's the number of businesses on the ground. You compare us to the state of Minnesota and the state of Illinois. Notice how cleverly I used those Big Ten colors in there. We are far outpacing the growth in Illinois. We are outpacing Illinois. We are outpacing Iowa and Minnesota. If we think now of, okay, fine, we're outpacing all of our neighbors, how do we do relative to the rest of the country? If we look at what happened in that surge for 2021, we are among the top tier states in terms of percent change in the number of businesses added in the community. And again, that lovely spot in the upper mid part of the country looks pretty good. Now, U.S. outlook. The Federal Reserve, of course, is moving into phase interest rates. That does have the impact of we are seeing long-term growth, sort of this year's growth rate dropped to about 1.7 versus we were looking at about 3% more beginning of the year. That's roughly the situation that will continue. The inflation rate will eventually tame from 5.2 to about 2.6 going forward. Federal funds rate, they're still expecting some interest rates to come forward. Overall, we're expecting the economy to move sideways and then after that start picking up steam again this quarter and next quarter. We're expecting the U.S. federal government, the U.S. employment rate to get back to full recovery. We've already fully recovered this quarter. We're expecting for Wisconsin Our real GDP recovered from the pandemic by fourth quarter 2021. In first quarter, we actually had the 9th highest personal income growth for 2022. Our real GDP was the 5th highest. It went down a tick, basically close to break even, while the rest of the country shrank. And you can see basically the red states are the ones that were most adversely affected. But we basically outpaced almost everybody except Michigan because of the auto industry. We're expecting our growth to continue through 2024, basically come down from 3.8 to settle into that 1.7 sustainable growth rate. We're expecting our unemployment rate to stay down in the 3% territory, only phasing up as we get sort of a growth in the labor force. We're expecting the labor force to continue to expand all through 2024. Household employment is already fully recovered. We're expecting that to expand as well. Our non-farm establishment employment will be recovered by 2023. Personal income growth outlook, wages and salaries are doing really well, and that's going to prop up income for 2022. The number doesn't look all that great on the total, but that's because the stimulus funds have been pulled out, because if you're getting 9% growth in salaries, the withdrawal doesn't adversely affect the Wisconsin economy. At that point, I'll hand it over to Emily, who can take over as I close out this. There it is, just by doing that. All right, all yours.
Thanks, Dan. All right, I'm Emily Campfield. I'm an economist with the Department of Revenue, and I'm just going to take a minute. I'm not close enough, am I? Take a minute to talk about some of the regional data we have. One note on the data. Some of the data is labeled as Oshkosh, Neenah, MSA, and some is as Winnebago County, but for the most part, they're the exact same area. They cover the same geography. It's just the difference in the labeling. Let's do this. A little bit what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to look at the MSA employment, then we'll move on and look at the MSA forecast for both employment and personal income, and then we'll take a look at some of the equalized values for this area. First of all, Winnebago County is much more concentrated in manufacturing than the rest of the state. That's probably not a huge surprise to anyone here. You have a pretty strong basis in the whole Fox Valley for manufacturing. In 2021, manufacturing was 22.8% of the Oshkosh-Neenah MSA employment versus 16.2% of Wisconsin. Wisconsin actually is the second most concentrated state in the nation in manufacturing. We still have that history of manufacturing very strong in Wisconsin. Indiana is the only state that outpaces us today. Wisconsin also has a slightly higher concentration in education than the Winnebago County and in trade and transportation. So if we look back at kind of how employment is doing today in the Oshkosh-Neenah MSA, it's good to look back and see where we were in April of 2020. And this is going to compare to February 2020 employment, which is pre-pandemic. So right out of the bat, employment was down 12.7% in April, just 2 months into the pandemic, versus 13.5% for Wisconsin. But most of that has actually been recovered. So as of June 2020, the Oshkosh-Neenah area is down 3.4%, and Wisconsin is still lagging by 2.2%. For Oshkosh, that's about 3,300 jobs, and for the state, it's about 66,000. So we still have a ways to go for total employment. And then, of course, some industries are more impacted than others. Of course, the biggest was leisure and hospitality, with declines of around 50% initially. Everything closed down in April of 2020. And both have bounced back pretty well in Oshkosh, Neenah, and Wisconsin, down about 7%. So still some growth to see on that side. I'm sure we've all felt this when we've gone to restaurants and there's just not enough servers around. They're still lagging. Trade, transportation, and utilities in Wisconsin has fully recovered and is a little bit up, but it's still down a little bit in the Oshkosh-Neenah area, but it's come up a lot from its lows during the recession, or during the pandemic. Now, if we look at kind of the forecast going forward, employment is expected to recover this year, both for Wisconsin and for the Oshkosh-Neenah area, right around the third quarter, although we are trailing that forecast by a little bit. I'm not sure at this point that we're going to hit it quite in the third quarter. We are redoing our forecast right now, and so it will reflect some of the more recent data in those forecasts. Personal income, and this is kind of similar to what John had said a minute ago. In 2020 and 2021, personal income was pushed up because of all the pandemic stimulus payments and increased unemployment benefits. And then, of course, that got subtracted out in 2022. Wages picked up in 2022, but overall personal income growth didn't grow quite as fast because of those coming out. And so you had kind of a divergence between wages and total personal income. In this slide here, total personal income is the darker green and wages is the lighter green. You can see that wages fell in 2020, but total personal income didn't. And then in 2022, you've got wages are increasing a little bit stronger as employment comes back online, but total personal income is much weaker, or total personal income growth is much weaker. Next up, I want to talk about the 2020 equalized values. Both John and Peter brought this up ahead of me. This just came out on Monday, this data, and it reflects, the 2022 data reflects values as of January 1st of this year. So this is mostly incorporating the 2021 price changes, or equalized value changes. We'll get the 2022 values next year. But you can see that this is just total equalized values, and residential values make up the bulk of that for just about every county in the state. Winnebago County and Wisconsin are right around 72.2.3%. You can kind of see the values. It ranges from about 50% in the lowest to almost 100% in the darkest color. And this is kind of the change over time. Winnebago County is the blue and Wisconsin is the red. And you can just see kind of, this is the year-over-year growth for total equalized values over time. You can kind of see during, or following the Great Recession, how much those really flattened out. Winnebago County didn't fall quite as much as Wisconsin did for 3 or 4 years. And so over time, the growth for Winnebago County has been a little bit stronger. And the same is reflected in the residential values, which again make up the bulk of total equalized values. Over time, Winnebago County was around 54%, Wisconsin at 45%. And then this is kind of showing a clip from one of our vizzes that we have on equalized values. And it's really fun because you can look up every single municipality in the state of Wisconsin and kind of compare them. So here I have the 2022 change in residential equalized values for Winnebago County at 13.4%, Oshkosh below that at 12.4%, Neenah at 9.6%, and then Fox Crossing was the highest at 17.1%. And Menasha at 12. And this is kind of a quick view of what the viz looks like. And I'm going to actually try to go there, pull it up for everybody. So we have data back to 1984. Oh, maybe that won't work today. But it's kind of fun to get on there and poke around. You can see, again, any municipality. We also have it for the state of Wisconsin total and for all the county level areas in the state. So that's going to be it for me today. Unless anyone has any questions. See if I can get back. All right.
Any questions for any of us?
people to fill those jobs. Any thoughts on the whole recessionary debate?
Sure, I mean, the economists would probably answer it better than I can, but I do think, and I'm curious to hear what they have to say, and I know we subscribe to a service called IHS, which most states do, most developed countries do, and they keep revising it, but I do think because of the demographic issue, you're just not going to have as many people hit unemployment unless you have a complete economic collapse. So that has to mitigate it. But I don't know, John and Emily, you want to take a crack and tell us what your predictions are and what you're seeing?
I think your second characterization was correct. Some of the panic is because you'll see real GDP decline. Part of it is because prices are just running so high. An illustrative example is state and local purchases for second quarter nationwide declined in their spending on infrastructure. Well, it's because the cost of building the infrastructure was 12%. It's not like there's any effort and a lack of spending. There's not anywhere near a size of collapse of demand. to your point, which I think is correct, not only is employment low, but you can see that labor shortage that I was alluding to and the job openings. You can have the job openings shrink without adversely affecting employment. There is a safety margin in there. And it's not just that. That is also true for backlog of orders. If you talk to manufacturers, and I talked to one the other day, actually in Appleton, and he said his firm had 50 weeks worth of back orders. And they've actually turned away business because somebody wanted the business sooner. And they said, well, if we can get it to you in 20 weeks, but it'll be double the cost. They walk away and they call back 2 weeks later and say, we'll take it. So there's enough pent-up demand and there's enough aggregate demand in the system that I think that the struggle is going to be still sort of supply chain, including labor force.
I think one thing to keep in mind too is the last recession we had, well, I guess the Great Recession is the biggest recession most of us have ever lived through. And it was a really, really bad, long, deep recession, and we're probably not going to see something like that again. If we do hit a recession, it's probably going to be pretty minor. I don't think we've been in one in this year, despite the drop in GDP. And when you look at the employment data, it kind of supports that. If we're adding 500,000 jobs in a month on the national level, it's not a recession. And then it gets kind of technical, what is a recession? How do you define it? There's different ways to do that, but I think that for most people, if we're still adding jobs, it's just not a recession. Whether or not we're going to go into one is definitely up for debate, especially with prices being what they are. That's hard. But I don't think
Some thoughts about the data you saw or information you'd like to see more of or any other issues you think we should be tackling, please let us know. We'd like to hear that as well. The Alderwoman.
Thank you for asking for thoughts. I have a thought. Now that I'm at this age where my kids are grown and they've left the state, how do I entice them back? And this is more of a question for the Fox Cities Visitors and Convention Bureau. But in terms of filling jobs, how can we entice our children who are out exploring bigger cities, more exciting opportunities to come back and see the lifestyle that they grew up with, and maybe they're more comfortable with it now. I'd like to see that, and I do worry about the shortage of jobs right here at the local level. We had one of our contractors say that we needed to be patient on one of our projects because he's got 6 cement trucks and no drivers, no CDL drivers for the trucks. Otherwise, they would be working on the project. So the contractors are asking for patience now. So that's one thing that really concerns me, and I'm sure many other people in this community. So if we can just get our kids to move back to the area, I think that'll help with the job shortage.
There's a theory on this about the life cycle of when kids move, when they come back, things of that sort. But a couple of things I would say are very clear. One is that for young people today, you have to have broadband. It's just vitally important. I have 2 kids that are, in their 30s, and, they're just attached to the phone. They want to be able to check their emails all the time. They're in professional kinds of careers. It's very vital for them. If they travel, if they would take, my son who has a daughter, if they take her an hour away into a park area, they want to have a broadband there because they just feel it's so vitally important. So that's one thing. Secondly, affordable housing. That's another issue. And it's a very important one. I know in the governor's budget, he put in $500 million for bonding to try and build more affordable housing. Unfortunately, the legislature did not pass that. But sometimes it takes a couple cycles. I know that, one of the big issues was a research and development credit. And I know in his first budget, he put in to try and double that credit. And, I'll tell you, as he put together his budget back a month after he was elected, I had 10 of the C-suite people come in from the 12 largest company to meet with me in our conference room of the Department of Revenue, and they said, the number one thing you can do is that research and development credit, because if we're doing the research in Wisconsin, likely we'll have the jobs there. Well, surprisingly, it still took two cycles. And the reason why I share that is because same thing in housing. Sometimes it takes a while, but I know that as we've done these community pandemic relief projects all around the state, that's what we hear the most of. Like in Rhinelander, they say that, you know, for their tourism economy, people have to live at least 45 minutes outside of Rhinelander. So housing is just vitally important. I know WHEAT has really put an emphasis on it. The governor's had a number of initiatives, but that's the second thing that I think is very important. Third, you know, things that make a difference is quality of life, obviously. And, you know, the good news is generally speaking, Wisconsin is pretty high quality of life in terms of, you know, good schools for, you know, their kids, in terms of, you know, cultural activities, in terms of, you know, if you're outdoors people and you like to go hunting or fishing or hiking or biking or those kinds of things, there's very few places like Wisconsin. So I think, you know, maintaining our parks, maintaining those opportunities, I think those are all very important things. And the laws we have, let's face it, you know, the laws that we pass for younger people, it matters to them. And in terms of how welcome they feel, in terms of what they believe. So all of those things make a big difference. But John, you want to tackle it?
Well, I'm going to echo, first of all, what Peter said about broadband and affordable housing, so I'll say he's right on both. To the general migration pattern, I've noticed Wisconsin tends to lose singles or newly married, no children in their 20s. They tend to move back in their 30s with children. And if you follow the migration data, I observed that at one point there was considerably more 8-year-olds than there were 1-year-olds 7 years earlier, and the teenagers too. So it came to the pattern. I realized that generally speaking, children, if they move to a state, they take their parents with them. You know, so I'll give you that reassurance. The second thing is there was a big change in 2021. And that is net domestic migration. The Census Bureau highlighted that northern Wisconsin was one of the bigger gainers. And talking to a different assessors group with state and local finance, when I presented to one of their advisory patterns, a woman from northwest Wisconsin who is an assessor chimed in and said, you're absolutely right. It was because broadband has been brought into these communities. Folks are leaving the Twin Cities and they're moving into northern Wisconsin. So you have opportunities opening up because that's changing. And if we were to follow the establishment and the population data, it confirms it. So, you know, maybe it's only a one-off coming out of the pandemic, but I think it can be more firmly established. The other of which, to try and reassure you, U-Haul Van Lines does a survey, and they sort of, what are the reasons that people move? And Wisconsin's basically break even. So U-Haul, we win. We're one of the top in destinations. Allied Van Lines does it sort of, why do people move? The number one reason people will move to Wisconsin is family, and number two is jobs. We have the jobs, so to try and reassure you, you should just keep sort of subtly having, you know, now that you've had your fun. So.
Kind of agree with John, and to, once your kids do have children, they'll probably move back if you offer free daycare. So, I mean that both as a jest, but also kind of seriously, they will go where there's daycare, especially if it's affordable.
Other thoughts on the issues? Yes.
What kind of impact are you seeing with remote jobs? We're seeing a lot of industries that are allowing a portion of their jobs not essential to be in the office. And how can we capitalize on others moving to Wisconsin and still maybe maintaining employment in California or something to that effect?
No, excellent point. It's something that we're attempting to track very closely. The one thing I should have said, which I think everybody knows, we've had a bigger investment in broadband just in the last 2 years than we've had in the history of the state. I mean, there's been just a massive push. I know it's been one of the governor's highest agendas. I know the legislature's been supportive, but it's just vitally important. So that's the good news. So if somebody, let's say, has a job with some high-tech company in California, can they live in Wisconsin? Increasingly, yes, in almost any place in Wisconsin. And I know that, you know, John had mentioned in terms of the, U-Haul data, and we've looked at other kinds of data points to analyze that. But increasingly, especially companies like, let's say, insurance companies, which are plentiful here in Wisconsin. We're fortunate to have so many terrific insurance companies. It's a clean industry. They pay high wages. But conversely, that staff could also move somewhere else in the country. So it's important that we keep them here. And so thinking through those kinds of strategies beyond broadband, I think all the points that were brought up here all will have an impact. But beyond that, I don't know, maybe if you have anything to add to that in terms of, but teleworking is I think the newest frontier, because many companies are allowing 100%. I know as a state to compete, like we allowed 50%, we moved to 60%, which is very welcome. But we've still lost, especially in the IT arena, because most IT companies let people work anywhere. They have 100%. So even as a state, as an employer, we're very cognizant. We're monitoring it very closely, and but it definitely is going to change the workplace dramatically, and it's going to continue, I think, to be sort of that new frontier and something we've got to look at closely and take into account. If you've got any thoughts on that in terms of factors you think matter, we'd be, or anybody, we'd be interested to hear. But anything you want to add to that?
The only thing I'd want to add is it's a two-edged sword. Speaking to other business groups, particularly in the Fox Valley, they have tipped me off to their talent as being rated by, when I used the example of Massachusetts, that was actually a case that I heard of, and I've heard of others where a manufacturer out of Stevens Point lost a key critical talent to Tesla, and all the person had to do was change his IP address. He didn't even leave Stevens Point. So that, at one level, that's great. It props up employment, but the other thing is for employers, that becomes a new frontier challenge as well.
Good afternoon. My name is Bob Schmeichel. I'm the town chairman in the town of Neenah. And although that is an important position, I want to thank you for all the statistics that you're giving us. I have the privilege also to be part of the Northeast Wisconsin Planning Commission, which I'm privileged to be on. I'm also the chairman of the Towns Association for all Winnebago County, which puts me in a leadership position for the Towns Association. Towns and Towns Association concerns, number one concern is what? Roads, transportation, because the demographics of wonderful communities of which we really partner well with the city of Neenah, thank you very much. There has been more migration out to the outside of the major metropolitan areas, the resultant of which the roads are just getting hammered. And when schools and other things also move out, you need more support. So thank you for what we have got so far in increases to roads, but what's the future going to hold for us? Because we need help for roads.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And we have a state and local finance division, and they work extremely closely, as you're probably aware, with the Towns Association and the League of Municipalities. And so we meet with them regularly. So we truly appreciate the input. Thank you for your leadership and helping to head the Winnebago County Towns Association. Just vitally important. And, roads has, been a high priority in this administration. We did get money, as I indicated, reallocate over $100 million, which is a plus. But we also need to analyze, the sustainability long term. Like, what is a reasonable funding source, a stable funding source? As we all know, gas taxes were like the best funding source forever, right? Because they used to be indexed, so that automatically when inflation went up, the gas tax went up, and that meant there was a continuous supply. But where we really fell short the last, going back 15 years ago when that stopped, was there wasn't that sustainable source. Plus, increasingly, of course, electric cars, whether you like them, don't like them, they're coming, they're increasing. It's slow, but that slope is going to continue to go upward as the federal government just passed their bill to give more incentives for people to purchase electric cars. So we do have to think carefully about what is the best source to have a dedicated fund for transportation. That's vital because, as much as we're mixing and matching and, trying to find as many funds as we can, that'll be important long term. I'm going to share one more thing, though, that especially as a civic leader, and I know we have the mayor and council member here. You know what kind of stunned me, frankly, when we met with the Towns Association about 3 weeks ago, one of their biggest concerns, they said, were for election clerks. And the clerks are leaving in record numbers because of the hostility they get over elections. I mean, you know, my mother was an election worker. I mean, most of the people she worked with, they're just good, honest citizens that go there and, you know, sign people in, count the votes. I don't know any of them that were ever dishonest, but I got to be frank. I mean, we really need to push as leaders in our community, whether you're a business leader, whether you're a civic leader, just the idea of civility. And these people have a job to do. And, you know, you might not like the laws, and that's great. Try and change the laws. But you got to treat people with respect. And for the Towns Association to say, one of their biggest concerns is you don't even have people wanting to run for town clerk anymore. My mother, you know, my mother-in-law at 85 years old was a town clerk treasurer in the Fond du Lac area. And, you know, and the report she hears now, I mean, you know, she loved the job. Everybody was nice. I mean, they all knew each other, small town, a friendship. Now you hear people come in and they're rude and they're questioning, I'll bet you're not going to count my vote. And it's like, what in the world, for God's sakes? So I just wanted to add that because I really think it's important. Everybody in this room's a leader. We need to preach civility. I think it's just so important. But roads, absolutely vitally important. It's a priority. And I do think we have to look at sustainability long term, though. Other thoughts?
Just a quick question. Could you elaborate a little bit more on personal property tax repeal? And, you know, where do you see that going? What's the impact on city, town, village revenue? And also, how does that going to impact tax incremental financing districts?
Sure. No, I could write a book on it. We, you know, the last couple months of session, you know, we have met with the authors. I would say, Maria, 3 times in 3 months, and you know, pushed very hard. You know, what happened is that, you know, there was a bill to do the personal property tax repeal, which the governor supports, everybody in our department supports. We all want to see it happen. We had 18 meetings with 18 staff because while it sounds very simple, you know, all these sections of the statute are cross-referenced. And there's very real issues. What's real property? What's personal property? And those things need to be worked out. And I'll tell you why. Because if they're not worked out, we're just going to have litigation after litigation. And to me, that's one of the worst things, because it's not good for people to have to hire attorneys to litigate whether the property is real or you know, or personal. And it's not good for, you know, state taxpayers to have to pay for attorneys. So we want to get it right. But what happened is the last day of budget, they passed the substitute amendment with new language. Much of it was poorly drafted and would have had a ton of litigation. So, you know, the governor instructed us, come up with a new bill. We did. And very open to compromise. In fact, you know, Speaker Voss and I actually are personal friends. We get together every couple months, and just from our time together as leaders in the legislature. And he was very interested in seeing it done. But in the 11th hour, just I really think that, you know, unfortunately, you know, it was more politics than anything got in the way. But the second thing that got in the way was, what do you do for municipalities? And, you know, as we all know, for town leaders, you know, city leaders, mayor, you know, shared revenue has been frozen for 15 years. And, you know, and we keep taking away funding sources from municipalities. Video services was the latest one that came off the bill. And there's nothing built in terms of an inflationary factor, so it makes it very difficult to be a municipal leader. So one of the things we tried to accomplish was to have in some sort of a factor so that municipalities weren't, just like every other fund we had in the last decade, be frozen. And that was one of the issues that got in the way, frankly, as well, because, you know, the governor insisted there has to be something to make sure municipalities aren't starved of resources. And that was really the last issue. And I think we could have resolved that too, frankly. But anyway, I suspect this will be one that'll be a high priority when we come back in January. And certainly, you know, we're going to push very hard in our department to try and get that accomplished. So thanks for the question.
I do have one question from an online participant. What are the economists' takes on the effect of the Inflation Reduction Act will have on Wisconsin's and the national economy in the short and long term, and why?
Great. I don't know if you've studied it very much, either one of you, but
We haven't figured it out yet, is the short answer.
I think it's just too soon. I think it's just too soon. As you know, it just passed last week, and you know, by the time you go through, you know, exactly what the impact is going to be, it is hard to really know exactly. But that's something that I'll put in one more plug for people to go to our website, you know, and look at our research and policy or our visualizations, because we haven't figured it out now, but I guarantee you within a few weeks you're going to see information that'll be available to everybody. Anything else? Any other insights anybody wants to share?
I have one quick question. I think, John, in your presentation, you mentioned that you see the labor pool actually growing over the next 2 years.
Right.
From where? Just curious.
Partly, we're seeing some in-migration. The other of which is, I think you're seeing the other demographics will start breaking our way. I mean, right now we're sort of confronting the thrust of the baby boomers, but eventually that will fade. And then we're starting to bring in more persons being born into the labor force. The other of which would be participation rates coming up. That's why I was most encouraged to see the teenage labor force participation rate being elevated, because that can carry forward.
Any other questions, insights? Otherwise, thank you all so much for being with us this afternoon, and feel free to follow up with us, send us an email, reach out, call our office. We're all happy to answer, and you know, our goal is to excel at customer service. We work very hard at that. I always tell people you never have to be shy about calling the Wisconsin Department of Revenue, because you know, our hold time is generally 1 minute and 30 seconds. And we ask people 2 questions when they're done. If the person was professional, if they helped them get their answer, and we get 99% customer service ratings, which I always like to joke compares very favorably with hotel chains and airlines. So thank you all very much. Great to be with you.